right, welcome back to another episode of the Press Coverage Podcast. We just wrapped up the 2020 NFL Draft, and we're here to talk about the Dolphins and Jets and how they did. So we're going to start off with the Jets.
Yeah, we're going to start with the better half of this draft teams. The Dolphins draft was terrible, but we'll get into that later. It's fine.
Get out of
So
here.
The Dolphins did it right, but I mean, if you look at this Jets draft class, Joe Douglas is our savior. That's all I really have to say about
The Jets secured our left tackle for the next 10 years at our first overall pick, Mekhi Becton.
He could stay
Which
healthy.
I think he'll stay healthy. He's just got to stop eating all those snacks. I think he could be like our next DeBrickashaw Ferguson, another big dude on the left tackle, being an anchor for Sam Darnold. I think it's a huge ad, and it's very important for our team. And Matt's favorite pick of the draft coming up in the second round, somehow he fell with all these receivers getting picked. Denzel Mims. So why don't you take it away?
Before I go absolutely off about Denzel Mims, let me touch on Becton real quick. I really wanted Jedrick Wills in this draft, and it was upsetting that he was taking the pick before us, but I'll take Becton over Tristan Wirfs there at 11, so I'm happy with the pick. And your comment about him eating, I actually saw an article that said he needs to eat more in order to lose weight. And I don't know how this works. I don't understand the science, but apparently he just needs to eat more food.
He's a monster. Maybe he just needs to eat better food.
That's like what his trainer told him to do, like a professional trainer.
He was probably just eating a bunch of junk, and now he's eating like nice lean meat. Get him like on the right track.
Did you guys see his dad in the draft?
Oh, yeah. His dad could be our right tackle in the future if we took him.
Oh my God. I don't want to be rude, but his dad looks like the size of a 18-wheeler.
Yeah, I see where he gets it.
You can see where he gets his size from.
I mean, it's
all right. I think it's time for me to go off about Denzel Mims. So he was my fourth favorite receiver in the entire draft class, and he ends up being the 13th receiver off the board. He has all the intangibles to be a wide receiver one in this league. He runs a 4.38 40 time. He's got the size. He's 6'3.5", and we can line him up as the X. He needs a little bit of development. He comes from Baylor, but he has all the raw ability, and if you give him a year or two to develop, I think he could really be our guy.
It just makes me nervous that he slipped so far in that second round when all these receivers were getting picked. Like the Broncos picked the second wide receiver before Mims even went off the board, so that makes me a little nervous. But otherwise, like I love the pick. I love the player. It's just I don't know how much I know compared to like these GMs, and that is definitely a concern.
I mean, like if you started looking at mocks like months ago or weeks ago, like Denzel Mims wasn't in the first round. He wasn't projected to go there. And then like 2 weeks before the draft, his stock started rising a lot. So maybe
his stock rose after the NFL Combine. When he tested so crazy. So that makes sense. It happens with a lot of players.
I don't think they had him go in the first round until like a week after. So.
Mm-hmm. But for me, I think the reason teams pass on him is for two reasons. One, if you look at a lot of the teams that pass on him, it's not teams trying to draft a number one X-prototype receiver. They're trying to draft a complementary guy, and that's not who he is to me. To me, he's an alpha number one. And then number two is the fact that the offseason might be abbreviated, and this is a guy that needs to develop a little bit. So you might not see the type of production in year one as you're going to see throughout his whole career. But I think he's the type of player that over time will develop into a number one receiver.
Yeah, I don't blame you for picking other wide receivers in front of him. Like Justin Jefferson, I think is a perfect fit for the Vikings. Brandon Ayuk will complement Debo really well, and like a bunch of those other first round guys. But then there was a lot that went before him. So like going with Michael said, like I could see that concerning. Okay.
And we can touch on the fact that he actually traded the 48th pick. So at this moment, when the Jets were on the clock at 48, everyone was surprised Mims was on the board there, and they thought he would be the pick, like all Jets fans on Twitter and everything. And he traded down to 59. A lot of people were upset about this, but he got a pick in the end of the third round, and this is a team that needs to fill holes on the roster, so it's understandable that he traded back. And then Mims ended up being there at 59, and then he got this extra third-round pick out of it. So it was a really smart move by him.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm impressed that we were able to trade out and then still got it to work. I remember we were watching the draft just during the day, and you were like spam texting us, like, I can't believe we traded the pick. Mims is on the board. What are we doing? And then Mims falls to us anyway, and then that's the pick in the second round. So that was really cool. that how that went down for us. Obviously, we had Mims in our first round for our mock. We had him going to the Packers, so we saw he could be like this player. Obviously, you see it, and I really like it for the future. I think this year we're going to struggle a lot.
We'll get to the Packers later in that abomination of a draft, but yeah.
And you see,
From the outside looking, my favorite player that you guys drafted is your third round pick, Ashton Davis. He was like my fourth or fifth safety on the board, but like in the second round, safeties just started flying off the board. So being able to get him in a third is definitely a big pickup for you guys.
So in the third, it's a steal. I agree. Joe Douglas emphasized before the draft that we're going for the best player available, even though we have a lot of holes to fill on this roster, and that's clearly what this pick was. But I also think Greg Williams definitely wanted this guy. He loves versatile players that can move around. And in college, Davis played free safety, he played strong safety, and he even played a little bit of cornerback. And I think they'll find him a home. He could be the eventual replacement for Marcus May next year if we end up moving on there, or he could get transitioned into corner. Who knows what they're going to do with him? But I think Greg Williams will definitely find a place for him on this defense.
Or see what happens with Jamal Adams.
I hope it's not that one.
Nothing.
Exercise his fifth-year option today, didn't they?
Yeah.
Better be nothing with Jamal Adams. He better be signed and on the roster.
I mean, picking a guy like Davis gives you some leeway, I guess, if you want to move on from him.
I feel like I think the only way we're going to want to move on is if Adams asks for a ridiculous contract. I think we're willing to extend him to be the top number one paid safety in the league, but we'll see how the negotiations go.
He should be paid for what he's going to produce. He is the number one safety right now, and he probably will be for the next 3 or 4 years at least.
Mm-hmm. So, but if he gets paid to be the number one safety, that's in the $16 million range. But there's speculation that he's going to want to be the number one paid player on defense, which would have to outrank C.J. Mosley's contract of $17 million. Which at that point, if you're paying a safety $18 million, although he might be worth it because he's Jamal Adams, it's a lot to pay.
I thought you meant in the whole league. I thought you meant he wanted to get paid more than Aaron Donald.
Oh, no. On our defense. There's no way he's getting quarterback money. All right, we can move on to our next pick. This is our actual third-round pick. The last one we got in the trade for Leonard Williams. This was our real third-round pick, and we took Jabari Zuniga out of Florida. This is a guy who's another raw prospect. He has the intangibles to become a decent pass rusher, and it's a need we have, but he didn't produce that well in college. He only averaged about 7 sacks a season, I believe. He had some injury concerns, but it's a raw pick to try and develop him into something.
Yeah, that's just kind of what you got to do. Maybe not in the third round, but in the fourth round, and that was close to a fourth round pick. So fourth, fifth, sixth, you're looking for guys who are talented and that you could just throw in. Obviously, they're going to have to develop, or you're looking for a solid backup guy. But I like that we were able to find a pass rusher that we think we can mold into something that would be productive soon.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the prospect, but DN is definitely a position that you guys can work on.
Yeah, it's definitely a position we need. So I like the pick there. So then we had that extra third-round pick that we got from trading down in the second round, and then we traded that pick again to get 2 fourth-round picks from the Patriots. So we got 125 and 129 overall in the draft. So now we're sitting with 3 fourth-round picks. And the first one, we take LaMichael Pirine, also out of Florida. He's a running back. He's the type of guy who's not great at anything, but he can catch the ball, he can run, he can block. And I think that's the type of versatility that we've been looking for.
Yeah, when we saw Samaje Perine mostly in Washington, and he just got cut by Miami recently, so we could possibly be reuniting the Perines in New York.
As much as I'd love to do that, I don't see it.
I never liked Samaje that much. I don't know much about Michael. I don't know if he's any better or significantly better, I would hope. But he's not going to start. He'll be behind Le'Veon Bell, so I'm sure he'll put in a little bit in the guest role, and we'll see how that plays out. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough to really grade it, but
yeah, I think it'll be a bit of an audition year for him. I see us moving on from Bell after this season. I just don't think Joe Douglas or Adam Gase wants to pay Bell the type of money he's getting. So if he's able to produce and be the guy, he could end up being our starter in 2021, or we could end up drafting another guy if he's more of a complementary piece.
Yeah. He's a good running back. He wasn't one of the top prospects, obviously. There was easily a top 4, but I think he was in that 10 range and lower. But he'll be a good prospect to develop.
Yeah. And then in the second, fourth round pick, we ended up taking quarterback James Morgan out of Florida International. So this is a very interesting pick. We need a backup quarterback, but taking one in the fourth round when you could fill out the positions of need is interesting when you know Darnold is your guy. But we need a backup, and Douglas has won 2 out of those 3 Super Bowls with his backup quarterback. So he knows the importance of the position, so you can't blame him for taking a flyer here.
Yeah, I don't at all blame the Jets for taking a backup quarterback, especially after the shit show we had as our starting quarterback earlier in the season when Sam Darnold went down with mono, and then we lost our backup quarterback, Trevor Siemian, and it was just a complete mess at quarterback. I think a fourth-round pick is completely justified. I would have even justified like a second-round pick like the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts. I don't think that was the best idea, but we need a backup. We need somebody who can come in and like play and not be completely incompetent if our starter goes down. So I think a fourth-round pick quarterback is a smart decision.
Yeah, it's also a guy you could sit and develop and learn behind Darnold, maybe his career going, like maybe a trade. But yeah, you don't want Simeon or anybody back there if Darnold decides to get mono again.
Yeah. So the thing is, with the fourth round quarterback, he needs a year to really develop to have any chance of being decent on the NFL football field. So if Darnold goes down this year and we have to put this guy in there, it's still not that good an option, in my opinion. I would rather just sign a little bit more money. To me, it's worth being able to win games, even if your starting quarterback goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And then our last pick in the fourth round, Cameron Clark. He was a left tackle playing at Charlotte, but it seems like he's going to develop more into a guard in the NFL. He actually played all over the line, and I could see him developing into a future guard in a few years. I think that's what Douglas is going for here.
Yeah, I trust Joe Douglas when it comes to offensive linemen, and I'm sure this guy will come in and just be like a general backup lineman in the beginning of his career. I don't think like he's a late pick. He's probably gonna be something, but I don't expect like much of him now.
Yeah. It's always good to pick linemen, like late flyers, early round guys. Anything in the trenches is something that you want. So I think it's
Yeah,
and especially versatile linemen. Sorry,
no,
yeah, having a versatile lineman that can fill any sort of backup role in the beginning is a pretty smart move, especially like in the late rounds.
Yeah, just 2 tidbits that I picked up about this guy is number one, he's really good friends with Mekhi Becton, which could be interesting in the future if he ends up developing into like our left guard or something. They could have that chemistry on the left side of the line. And then the second is I think Douglas turned on the Clemson game tape when he saw this guy, right? So Charlotte isn't necessarily a school that plays a lot of high competition, but when they did play Clemson, he absolutely dominated as the left tackle. He had a great game on film, and I think he saw the potential in this guy in that one game that maybe he could develop into something in the NFL.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And I like that his best game was against one of the greatest schools in college, of course. So that's a huge plus for his resume. And it's nice to like get some crazy talent guys that you can see could completely blow up in these like late rounds. So I think we nailed our draft. The Jets were one of the only teams that would really get like an A to an A plus even in this draft off my board, I would say.
Even in the 5th round here with this next pick, we got a guy who's arguably a second-round talent in Bryce Hall out of Virginia. This is similar to the Bless Austin pick last year, where he's dealt with injuries, which made him fall in the draft, but he has the talent to be a starting corner in the league. Again, in the 5th round, that's just the type of value you're looking for. You have the upside to be a starter, and we need corner help, so it's definitely a solid pick in my opinion. One of my favorite picks of our draft.
Yeah, I think our corner situation is very interesting. We traded a pick for a corner, which we were going to talk about, and we have a lot of corners now. Pierre Desir's coming in. Poole was really good for us this year, being our slot corner, and we brought in plenty of like corner depth and all these pieces. And we had Bless Austin and who was our other corner that was locked down
Arthur
from
Millette.
last year? Arthur Millette. Random like out of nowhere guys that came in and were completely shut down for like 3 weeks towards the end of the season. Our corner depth is crazy at a time where we had no corners like 2 years ago, and now out of nowhere we have all these corners that hopefully a couple of them will pan out and we'll have a good secondary.
I definitely like what Douglas has done with the corner room. He came into a position where he signs with the Jets and he has to deal with the Trumaine Johnson contract, right? One of Mike McCagden's worst mistake as our GM. So he can't afford to really pay a corner big money, but he's been able to get the depth to make up for it. We don't have any stars, but we have enough starters that even with some injuries, we have guys who can plug and play. And that's all you can really ask for in our position.
Cornerback's a position that like you get at like I feel like cornerback's a position where you could easily have like a great year and then a terrible year, which is like the point with Trumaine Johnson. And like to have a bunch of guys who can play or who you think can play is definitely a luxury to have in this league.
No doubt. So then our last pick in the draft, Braden Mann, punter out of Texas A&M. So you might be asking, why did we draft a punter when you could just get one as an unrestricted free agent? But this is no ordinary punter we have here. This has been by far the best punter in college football the last 2 years. He had a highlight punt that went like 85 yards. The biggest knock on this guy was that he outkicked his coverage too much. So he kicked the ball too far. So I think this is the guy where you might be head scratching about taking a punter, but I think it's worth the pick late in the draft.
I personally would never head scratch the pick of a punter. One of my favorite players ever to play the game has been Pat McAfee. His radio show is great. And I liked Marquette King when he was big. So I think punters are super useful. If you have a good punter that really can lead the league and be the – so I would never hate on a punter. I actually love that we got a punter in the 6th round, and I think it's cool.
Who has the Marquette King T-shirt though?
That's true.
Dang.
This is the number one punting fan here.
I mean, special teams is a very underrated aspect of football. Plays happen every single game, and if you don't have great special teams, then you're not going to be a good team. Having a good punter is a part of that, and I think it's a great idea to take a punter with a late round pick. Anybody on the special teams, really.
Especially with how often we had to punt last year. You think we might as well get an ace there.
Yeah. All right.
I want to go to the game and just see him booted into the stands.
Do you guys want to do a complete overview, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, just real quick, we did have an extra 6th round pick, which we ended up trading, like we talked about, for cornerback Quincy Wilson from the Colts. Former 2nd round pick. He's the type of guy where he could be a hit and maybe end up starting as our 2nd corner, or it could just be a pick we send and get nothing out of it. But it's worth the risk to me with a 6th round pick. So it's a good upside trade.
Yeah, I have no problem sending a 6th round pick for a 2nd round talent from a couple of years ago. I mean, you're not going to have to pay him unless he's good. So it'd be worth paying him if he's good. So I find no problem with that at all.
Yeah, I think you guys had a solid draft all around. Addressed a lot of positions that you needed to. So it was a good draft. All right.
Best in years.
Yeah,
I
think Joe Douglas is going to be a really good GM in this league. And I think
I'm excited about him. See how he turns his roster around.
Better than Mike McCagden.
Don't get me started about Mike McCagden, dude.
All right.
Yeah, we've been in a bad place for a long time. And the dynasty just ended. Now we have a competent GM, so who knows?
It's a good time to be on the rise.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to move on to the Miami Dolphins. And with the 5th overall pick, we picked the guy who all of us had us mocking, but traded up to number 3 for Tua Tagovailoa. I'm very excited as a fan. You got the big name. You're surrounding him with talent. I think this was a great pick for the Dolphins. Just got to work on that hip and see where he's at the beginning of training camp.
Yeah, so everyone obviously knows this is a very, very controversial pick. My dad works with the New York Jets. That's why I'm such a huge Jets fan. And he told me that the trainers on the Jets staff said they wouldn't have drafted him at all. He's just going to get hurt and he's not going to last. So as a Jets fan, we're happy to see him get picked. I think he's a potential Hall of Fame talent as long as he stays healthy, but his health is a much bigger concern than maybe a lot of fans are realizing. And if this pick doesn't pan out, I don't think Miami's completely screwed. They still have Ryan Fitzpatrick that's going to play start this year. They have Josh Rosen that they could still develop into a potential starting quarterback at some point down the line. So even if Tua ends up being an injury mess, it's still worth the risk taking him at 5 over someone like Justin Herbert, who maybe wouldn't be as good of a starter. So there's a lot of like controversy with that, but I think in the end, it's probably the right decision to go with the Hall of Fame potential accuracy over the big arm.
To me, it was the right pick mostly because I'm just not a big fan of Herbert. I think you got to take your swing at quarterback because if you don't really get a high upside guy at the most important position, you're not going to be that much above average, even if your roster is set. So even with the injury risk, I feel like it's worth taking the shot, especially when you have all those extra picks in this draft. You have more picks in next year's draft, so you have the chance to, if it ends up completely blowing up in your face, you have the chance to adjust and adapt to it. And I think you've got a shot, as like we said, like a Pro Bowl type of talent at quarterback.
Yeah, if Tua didn't get hurt this season with the hip injury, I think he would have went higher than Joe Burrow. Honestly, he would have put together 3 seasons rather than 1 season. He would have. He shows on the field that he's more athletic and more of like a playmaker. But I think obviously Burrow with that season he had was the right pick at 1. So moving on to number 18, the Dolphins want to surround Tua with some help. He played with that great offensive line in Alabama, and so the Dolphins went out and drafted Austin Jackson. He's a tackle. He played at USC, and he's only 20 years old. He's definitely raw, but he can definitely develop into one of the better tackles in this league. And last season, he played great, but his production was a little bit down because he's still recovering from surgery that he had to donate plasma to his sister to save her life. So he's definitely a character guy, definitely a Brian Flores kind of guy. And I think that he can turn into a great tackle, but he's definitely a little bit of a project.
Yeah, I think he's fine. My biggest concern is that he just wasn't one of the big 4 tackles coming out, and that isn't like the worst thing, not being like an elite tackle coming in. And I think maybe a first round pick on a project tackle is a little bit nerve-wracking if I was a GM. But since it's their second first round pick and they desperately need a tackle, I understand where it came from. I don't know if it would have been my move at 18, maybe wait till 26, but I guess it's like worth it. Not a
Yeah,
bad pick.
I go back and forth on if I like this pick. It's definitely a positional need. You want to get a guy to protect Tua. If he's your quarterback in the future, you need protection, and that line is not in very good shape. But I think at the same time, it's a bit of a reach. I didn't see him as a mid first round type of guy, more of late first, early second. And you have other positions of need, so you could argue that they should just be drafting best available player. But again, you need a tackle, so you can't really say it's too bad of a pick.
Yeah, I think you need a tackle to protect your new franchise quarterback. And actually, a statistic that I saw today from PFF is that Austin Jackson only allowed 11 QB hits during his 1,152 pass blocking reps during his career at USC, which is 0.9%. He only allowed 11 QB hits on 0.9% of his plays that he played at USC, which I think is a crazy stat that goes overlooked. So now the Dolphins have the number 26 pick from the Houston Texans, but they just traded back with the Green Bay Packers, moved back to 30, and they selected Noah Igbenogany, who I did not expect them to pick. As a fan, I was at first, as soon as this pick happened, I was very confused. Why are we picking a corner? We have the 2 highest paid corners in the league. But then you watch the tape on this kid, and he was a receiver his first year at Auburn, and then moved to corner his second 2 years, and he's an athletic beast. His parents were Olympic sprinters. His sister is an athlete. He comes from an athletic family, and he's a very physical corner. And I think the most important thing that he needs to work on when he gets to the pros is like spinning his head around. Like he's good at covering. He can go step for step for pretty much anybody in college football, but once the ball's up, he's not great at turning around. But when he does, he has great ball skills from being a receiver. So that's something he's going to have to work on. And it's definitely an underrated pick. Slide him into slot corner, and I think he'll be good to go in year 1.
So is this a guy that you know can play slot corner? Because I don't know too much about him.
Yeah,
So it seems like that's the only reason to draft him here.
Yeah, he can.
I believe I heard an analyst, like when they first announced that pick, say that he would be their slot corner. He was the best slot corner available in the draft, someone said. I don't know how accurate that is, but that was really the only – I never even really heard of him because I wasn't going like as deep into the draft, like coming up onto it. I was going to like let that be more of a surprise and just see how it went. And he seems like, from what I've heard, he's going to step in and be really good for them. and that it was a really good pick. And moving down and being able to get a guy that's going to do that was great for Miami. But it's just personally, I didn't really know him coming off.
Yeah, I'd say slot corner is a pretty underrated position in today's NFL. You really need to cover mismatches, and in the slot, you need to have guys that can cover those quick receivers that can just run slants or run to the outside, and you need to have a quick guy that can stay with them. So you usually don't see this type of pick in the first round, but I think the league's starting to head towards this way. So I think it's a pretty solid selection.
Yeah, you also see that a lot. Him playing slot corner also allows Bobby McCain to move back to safety where he's more comfortable. So it's definitely a good pick. Their first pick in the second round, they selected Robert Hunt, a offensive lineman. Again, those trenches for Tua. Like, he might not start right away, but it's definitely somebody, like how I said with the Jets, like, you just need to build the trenches. Like, if you want to protect your franchise quarterback, these are the kind of guys that you want. And he's a very versatile player. He can play all 5 spots on the offensive line. So, again, another good pick in my book. But I know the Dolphins were looking for a running back this draft, and at the time I was, like, very disappointed because DeAndre Swift went right away, and then Jonathan Taylor went like 2 or 3 picks right before the Dolphins. But after they picked Hunt, I looked him up, and he was a great player at Louisiana Lafayette, and looking forward to seeing him play.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Jonathan Taylor was on the board, you can't pass that up. I think arguably they could have picked that left tackle at 18 or 26 and picked Jonathan Taylor in the first round, which I also would not have had a problem with. But the way their draft shook out makes sense. Line is more important. They have no really great caliber starters, so any sort of help there is huge. And I think it's fine with Mike Hunt. Or
Yeah, it's
what?
Robert Hunt.
Robert Hunt.
Yeah, it's not a very flashy pick, but I love the selection here. He's one of the best interior offensive linemen in the draft. And as a Jets fan, I checked out those players, and he was one of my favorites. You need to protect Tua, right? That's once you draft your quarterback, that should be your number one goal, is to build that offensive line around him. You got to start in the trenches, and I think the Dolphins did a pretty good job of that in this draft.
All right, next up is Raekwon Davis. So this was pick number 56, and at pick number 55 was when J.K. Dobbins went to the Baltimore Ravens. And watching the draft, I was like, let's go. Dobbins is going to slide to us. Dobbins is going to slide to us. And the pick right before, I'm like, oh, the Ravens don't need a running back. They got Ingram. They got Justice Hill. They're not taking one. So it was a little disappointing, but as soon as we picked Raekwon Davis, I was happy with it. It's a guy who I looked up a lot during the draft because I thought he could have been an earlier second-round talent. But at Alabama, he was extremely good his freshman year, and then from there, his production went down a little bit. But a lot of reporters are saying that, like, when he was younger, like, the fame kind of got to his head. They were projecting him to be an early first-rounder. And but I think him coming into a situation with Brian Flores, he's a guy who could get his head on straight and get the most production out of him as he can.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not like a ton to say going down. I mean, you would have loved to have Dobbins, obviously. And I think Dobbins wasn't the guy with your first, second round pick. Like if Jonathan Taylor was there, then I see it. I wouldn't see Dobbins up at that early second round because like he's great, but the fourth running back off the board, like I don't know if he would have started right away, like in front of Jordan Howard in Miami. So I can tell it might not be like the number one thing. So I'm not worried that you lost him as much as maybe a huge Miami fan might be. But you got to make the right picks at when they come. And you're not going to move up for a running back. So I see. I get it.
Yeah, I don't think the running back was as important for them as you guys seem to. You already have Jordan Howard, and I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but they did make a trade for Matt Breida, who's another guy that can complement him. And then maybe you can look for a good running back in the draft next season.
Yeah. But so then with our third round pick, we picked up Brandon Jones, safety from Texas. He was an okay safety in Texas. He was able to get the ball. He was big with interceptions down there. And he's a guy who didn't get to go to the combine. So instead of being able to work out, he he broke down 4 games from every team's playbook, and that he watched the games, broke down their defenses, and he wanted to show how smart he was rather than how physically gifted he was, because he couldn't show that off. And I think that says a lot for a guy, and I think that's definitely another Brian Flores kind of guy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting what thing that he did, and it was really smart of him because, especially coming from a Patriot type system with Brian Flores being an ex-Patriot coach, the Patriots are very analytical and they play their defense like very much anyone can play it, next man up mentality, and just go in and do your job. So as long as you know what your job is and you're able to like fill your role, you don't have to be an athletic freak. You just have to be a guy who makes the right decisions and cuts like press routes right and is able to like make your tackles and be solid. And that's what they were able to get here with this guy who shows that he has the brain to play football, and he has the body, but he wasn't invited to the combine. So he shows you that Tom Brady, I have the brain for your system.
No, he wasn't invited. He was just injured.
Yeah,
He was invited.
so I meant wasn't, but well, he couldn't show it off.
Yeah, the injury players are always interesting in the draft, especially when they don't test. There's a much wider range of where they could go. In the third round, just seems like it was too much of a fall in this case, but it seems like it could be a good selection if it fills a role for the Dolphins defense here.
Yeah. So next up, we had their first 4th round pick. It was a trade up. They packaged. So Dolphins fans everywhere were very disappointed that we didn't move anywhere on the first 2 days. Like, you come to this draft with 14 picks, and all you do is move back one spot and pick up another pick. So you had 15 picks, and there was no movement within the first 3 rounds. Like, if you wanted a guy, you could have went up and got him with whatever draft capital you wanted. So finally, on day 3, they decided they wanted to move up, and they picked a guard in Solomon Kinley, who played at Georgia. Him, Isaiah Wilson, and Andrew Thomas really held the ground down for that Georgia defense and protected Jake Fromm and let DeAndre Swift get to the holes. The only knock on Kinley is that he's not great in pass protection. Like, he lets up sacks every once in a while, but on the second level as a blocker, he's a great run blocker.
Yeah, and in the NFL, like, you're gonna let up sacks. That's not like a horrible concern. You don't love that he lets up sacks in college because that means maybe he won't be able to handle the guys in the interior in the NFL quite as easily. But a lot of it is double teams, so you're gonna have help there. And I'm sure he'll be a good, solid player just to put there. Maybe not for a long time. He might just be a temporary kind of fit, plug and play, because the Miami line right now is just horrendous. Like, without any sort of help from rookies and everything, there was a lot of injuries. There was a lot of trades. Like, they got rid of a lot of players, and linemen suffered that too. So any sort of help there is huge for Miami, because Tua, as an injury-prone quarterback, can't be getting sacked too much.
Yeah, as a Georgia guy, you're not too concerned about him giving up a few sacks. Like, he's facing high competition, so it's not the biggest concern. And again, they're fortifying the trenches here. That's what you need to do. You need to take shots at the position. Even if it doesn't work out, you need to keep taking shots until you fill that line and make sure, especially an injury-prone quarterback, you want to make sure he's protected the best you can.
Yeah, agreed. So coming up, we had the 153rd and the 104th overall picks, and we traded the 153rd pick for Matt Breida, which kind of relieved some of my stress throughout the draft, because I really thought that we should have went after a running back earlier, and missing out on Dobbins by 1 pick was kind of a killer, but it alleviated me. We picked up Matt Breida. I think he's a good guy to complement Jordan Howard. He can receive, and I know he didn't stay very healthy in his first 3 years in the league. He's only missed like 5 games, I believe, but he averages 5 yards per carry, which is something that definitely goes unnoticed when you talk about Matt Breida.
Yeah, my concern with Matt Breida is he's not a 49er anymore. So you're not going to see him like dominate like he was in San Francisco for the span of him taking like a lot of carries out of that offense. They make those no-name guys look incredible, and Matt Breida was definitely a product of their system. He has that breakaway speed that you want to see out of a running back. Like, he's one of the faster guys in the league at the position. So you can definitely take advantage of that if you're Brian Flores or if you're the offensive coaches of Miami and make that work. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to maximize his potential like San Francisco had. So that's a concern with that. But you're not going to find a better running back with a pick in the draft this late. So it's definitely worth the trade, but you just got to be careful because he might not be as electric as we would hope.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the whole 49ers thing. If you follow Kyle Shanahan throughout his coaching career, he's always been able to coach up running backs and put them in a position to succeed. So that might be where the skewed numbers come from. But at the same time, you're not really looking for a long-term answer here. You're looking for someone to complement Jordan Howard and someone who's an NFL caliber player, and you're going to get that in Breida. He's someone you could put on the field, take Howard off, and if you weren't looking to draft running backs this year, then this is a pretty good trade for them.
Yeah, he only has 1 year left on his deal too. So him and Howard has 2 years. He has 1 year. Maybe take a running back pretty early next year. Maybe get Travis Etienne out of Clemson. That'd be nice. So with 154, which is the pick right after, they got Breida for. They took Jason Strawbridge out of North Carolina, another defensive lineman. And, yeah, they're really just trying to build those trenches. 6 out of 9 of the picks that the Dolphins took were in the trenches. So I think it was definitely a good pick. I think he had 15 and a half sacks his final year in North Carolina, which isn't like a top-rated school or whatever, but he definitely produced, which is something that you're looking for. And he can play end or tackle, so it's another thing. Versatile is a big thing that the Dolphins went after in this draft.
Yeah, we're getting pretty low into these rounds. These are guys that probably aren't going to start. So versatility, I think, towards the end of the draft is bigger than in the beginning because you don't know where you're going to need them to play backup. And having a guy who can play anywhere on the defensive line, if there was an injury or anything like that, I think is cool. And I think it's smart of Brian Flores.
Yeah, so when you're looking to slate into the draft, you're really looking for two things. You're either looking for guys who are athletic and have the build but don't quite have the production yet, or you're looking for guys who had great production at a smaller school. And I guess that's what you found here in this guy. You got to take shots, right? You got these late round picks. You have to take a guy who has the upside to play, and hopefully that's what the Dolphins are looking for in him.
All right, now moving into the Dolphins' last 3 picks, we pick up Curtis Weaver out of Boise State, another defensive tackle kind of guy. Another versatile guy, same stuff as before. He has a lot of legal problems, so that's why he dropped so low into the 6th round. But he's got a lot of potential, and I think it's another good pickup by the Dolphins.
Yeah, that's what we like to see in these late flyers. He was he a 3rd or 2nd round talent? I remember hearing
he was up there. He was definitely a guy I had my eye on in the earlier rounds.
Yeah, he's a pretty good find late in this draft for the Dolphins. I don't know how it's gonna pan out with him, but it's what we like to see when they get these potential really good players.
Yeah, I definitely like the pick this late. I don't have too much to add, but I agree that he was a guy that could have won earlier in the draft, and you got him late, so he could end up producing beyond his draft capital.
Mm-hmm. All right, now it's the pick that I'm really excited about is our long snapper, Blake Ferguson. As we talked about the Jets, special teams is a very, very important part of this game, and long snapper is one of the most important. If your long snapper can't get the ball off and be able to block, then your kicker is not going to have enough time. Your punter is not going to have enough time. So the Dolphins' long snapper was terrible last year. I'm glad that they picked somebody up late in the draft that can play, and his brother plays in the league too. So it's a long snapper family. So that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, this is what I would classify as a completely worthless pick. I think you wasted your late round pick here with the long snapper. You could have signed as an unrestricted free agent. I think the Dolphins are a completely incompetent agency after seeing this pick, and it really kind of throws their entire draft off track for me. So those are my thoughts about the long snapper late in the draft for Miami.
Yeah, I get it's an important position. As a Jets fan, we have T. Henne, best long snapper in the entire game, really. He's an elite long snapper. So we see the importance in the position. You got to get your guy, I guess. I don't know if I would have drafted one either, but.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, he's not a guy who would have went to undrafted. He's one of the most talked about long snappers because of how good he was and how much success his brother has had and how much success he had at LSU. So I think it's a good.
And when you have this many picks, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
I'm very glad you convinced yourself that this wasn't the worst decision your franchise has ever made in the draft.
The worst decision we ever made was not signing Drew Brees, so let's not even go there. All right, so the Dolphins' last selection was the most interesting player in the entire draft, in my opinion, is Malcolm Perry. He's the next Taysom Hill. He can play quarterback, running back, wide receiver. He can do it all. He did it at Navy. He had stats in every single position. He's fast as hell, and he can throw the ball too. So I'm very interested to see what the Dolphins want to do with him. He's the next Taysom Hill, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I think every team's little quest to find their own Taysom Hill is eventually gonna seem pretty stupid. I think Taysom Hill is a really unique player in what they get him to do in New Orleans. But if the Saints try to put him in as a starting quarterback type role, I think he's gonna flop. And I think chasing this Taysom Hill archetype player is ultimately gonna end up not working out for teams that try to do it. Even though it's worked for Sean Payton, I think it's gonna be people are going to over rely on them because they have all this versatility, and then when they're put in pressure situations, they're going to fail. So I just find it as a risk. I mean, obviously it's not that much of a risk, super late in the draft. If you can find a guy who's able to do all those things, like running, catching, blocking, then sure, it'll be worth it. But I don't know how much these guys are going to really do under the spotlight. And they're usually so late in the draft because they're just not that great at any one position.
It's a flyer pick. It's not too big of a deal. Maybe they'll make something out of him. But at the same time, you have to remember, as of now, you just drafted Tua, and you still have Fitzpatrick and Rosen under contract. So if they're going to keep this guy on the active roster, they're going to have to probably move Rosen, which I'm sure they're open to doing. But maybe even just cutting him. You can't really have 4 quarterbacks.
I don't think that they drafted him to be a quarterback. I think they drafted him to be a running back or a wide receiver. I think most likely. But I disagree with what you said, Michael, because the 6th and 7th round is where you take guys who you don't think will make it, who you think you won't get in a undrafted free agency. Taking a guy this is a guy that people wanted. He would have been the first guy to go in the undrafted wave. So I'm glad that they picked him with the 7th round pick. And you're not picking him to be your next quarterback. The Saints don't want Taysom Hill to be the next quarterback, I don't think. That's why they signed Jameis. But he's not a quarterback. That's not what he's going to be used as at the next level. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I get worried when teams see these athletes and think that Lamar Jackson worked so well being this amazing dual threat quarterback, basically running back, that if we can find an athlete like that, we'll be able to change the game. And I just worry that that's not the right call. I don't think it was a bad idea picking him super late in this draft. And I think it's smart that if he's a guy you want on your offense somewhere, that you should use a pick on him instead of waiting and risking the unrestricted free agency. But it seems like you shouldn't throw too much into it, supporting these kind of guys.
Yeah, it's just a late guy who I'm excited about.
Like I was saying earlier, though, what you're really looking for in the late rounds is either you're looking for a guy that's productive in a small school or an athlete that you think you can either adjust into a new role or that you can hone his skills by developing him. And really, you're just looking for an athlete that you think can play in the NFL. There's no point in taking a guy who was decent in college, but just won't be able to transition to the next level. You have to take a guy who has the intangibles to possibly develop and just take shots at him.
Yeah, and the last thing that the Dolphins did in this draft was trade another one of their later 7th round picks to the Seattle Seahawks for a 6th round pick next year. So I think that's definitely worth it, moving up a whole round. But that pretty much wraps up the New York Jets and Miami Dolphins draft days. So now we're going to move into some of the later quarterbacks, some of the ones that aren't talked to about as much. And Well, first of all, we're going to start off with Jordan Love, who is a guy who's being talked about a lot because the Packers decided that they want to move up and take the heir to Aaron Rodgers with 4 years left on his contract. So I'm going to let you guys talk about that first.
Yeah, I would actually disagree that these guys are not talked about. I think Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts, who we're also going to talk about, are two of the most popular talked about quarterbacks coming out of this draft. Joe Burrow was like a big conversation topic before the draft because we knew he'd be the number one guy. But now that after everything's happened, like even the drama with Tua and Herbert are less talked about than Jordan Love being drafted by the Packers and Jalen Hurts being drafted by the Eagles, two teams that clearly have like great starting quarterbacks that are going to be there for like 4 years minimum, I think, in both of their cases. And it's crazy that these guys are getting picked so early to be these backups that, like, I guess potential heirs. But Jordan Love, particularly in the first round, the Packers moving up is just so crazy to me that they didn't move up to get Rodgers when Favre was still there, but they moved up to get Love while Rodgers is still there. I think that's really like just unbelievable for the Packers.
Yeah, I'm sticking with Jordan Love for a second because I have a different opinion on the Hurts pick. I think the Love pick was awful. The Packers were the number 2 seed in the NFC last year. This is a team you're trying to build the roster up to overcome and make it to the Super Bowl. And it's a team that's desperate for receivers in one of the most receiver-heavy drafts in years. And you don't take a receiver in any of the early rounds of the draft. I don't think they took one at all. And instead you trade up and you take a quarterback who couldn't even if Rodgers went down now, this isn't a guy that's going to be able to contribute that well. He's a guy you're trying to develop as your long-term answer, which just Rodgers is only 36 years old. It's not really a position where you want to be developing a guy. I just don't understand the pick. Sure, he could be great in a few years and become the next franchise quarterback. But that's just not what you're looking for right now if you're the Packers.
Yeah, and also Rodgers, when Favre was 35 and they drafted Rodgers, it was because he was threatening retirement all the time, and Rodgers was potentially the number 1 overall player in that draft class. Jordan Love is arguably the 4th or 5th best quarterback in this draft alone. So him going to the Packers where they have an established Hall of Fame veteran, like still in maybe the tail end of his prime, but you could argue is like just outside of his prime still. And he's still going to have a great arm and give you these comebacks and be a winner. And they went 13-3 last year with him having a down year in stats. I just think it's like unbelievable that they would even consider something like this in the first round.
Yeah, I hate it when people try and compare this situation to the Aaron Rodgers situation. Brett Favre, 3 years before they even drafted Aaron Rodgers, he was like, if I win another Super Bowl, I'm out. Like, he was like, yeah, I don't really care anymore. I'll play. I won't play. So then you're sitting there at whatever late round pick, and Aaron Rodgers is still there. He's still there. You don't have to trade up for him. Don't have to give anything up. And he's there. He could have been the best quarterback in that entire draft, and he wound up being that best quarterback in that draft. And you get him at 26, and he sits behind Favre for a few years, learns the ropes, and then he takes over, and he's just the quarterback of the future, one of the best of all time. In this situation, you're sitting there at pick number 30. You went 13-3 the year before. Jordan Love, not a lot of people really liked him as a prospect. A couple people liked Jalen Hurts better. They liked Jake Fromm better. They liked Jacob Eason better. But he has the intangibles. But if you wanted to take him, you could have got him at 30. The Dolphins were not going to take him. The Ravens were not going to take him. The Titans were not going to take him. Like, I don't understand why you even had to sacrifice a pick to move up. With Rodgers, they just had to sit there. With Love, you have to move up. And Rodgers has 4 years left on his contract. And that's not saying he won't sign another extension. Depending on how he plays, he's made it very clear that he wants to finish his career in Green Bay. And he's even stated that legacy is very important to him, and he just wants to end there. So I don't understand the pick. Like, I'm not knocking Jordan Love. Like, I'm glad he got drafted where he did. Like, I'm glad he's going to make his money. Like, he could turn into something very great, but in 4 years or 5 years or more, or if he gets traded. But, I mean, I'm happy for the kid, but it's just not the most ideal situation you want to get drafted into.
If you want Rodgers past 40, which it seems like he's talked about playing as long as Brady even, and if he's saying he wants to stay in the Packers, you're either in a position where you're going to move on from Rodgers yourselves, or you're going to have to trade Jordan Love in a few years. You're not going to be able to pay them both if all things work out well. I just don't see the point. I understand developing a quarterback behind in certain situations, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah. So
It's just we could very well be put in a situation where we are eating these words if Jordan Love ends up being the savior the Packers needed, and Aaron Rodgers goes down and gets hurt, and Jordan Love leads this team on like some sort of historic run, then we're all gonna look dumb.
and I'd be extremely happy for him if he did that. Like, I'm not knocking Jordan Love as a player. I'm knocking where the Packers took him and what they had to do to get him.
Yeah, the Rodgers haven't taken the Packers haven't taken a skill position player in the first round in 16 years, which is the point Aaron Rodgers has made in interviews, and he hasn't been like trashing the franchise. He hasn't been saying you have to do this. He's just been saying he would appreciate some help on offense. And one reason I am happy they did this pick is I was scared that they were eyeing Denzel Mims at 30, so I'm happy he fell, obviously. But from the Packers' perspective, I think you really want to take a receiver there.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the next quarterback that got taken off the board, which is somebody who Michael talked about a little bit earlier, is Jalen Hurts, the athletic guy from Alabama, then went to Oklahoma to go get a starting job back. He produced his final year at Oklahoma, but again, not getting drafted into the best possible situation, sitting behind Carson Wentz, a guy who's young, but like you see how it worked out for Nick Foles. Carson Wentz went down. Nick Foles popped in, won a Super Bowl, and got paid. Like, this isn't the worst situation to be in, but I guess to sit behind Wentz is good, but you're still ideally not playing for a while. And I saw reports about him possibly playing like a wildcat or something and having both QBs out there at the same time, but I don't know how that's going to work out. Nobody knows how that's going to work out. So if I'm Jalen Hurts, I'm a little confused by the destination, but I'm still looking forward to learning from Carson.
So for me, I think Jalen Hurts makes a lot more sense than Jordan Love. And it's because Carson Wentz has never played a full season, like his entire career. That might not be true, but it really feels like, especially recently, every time he gets to the postseason, he finds a way to get hurt, and they need the backup to come in. And Nick Foles was somehow confident enough to win a Super Bowl, or competent enough to win a Super Bowl. So if you can get a backup quarterback that can come in and be as productive as Nick Foles was, or be able to lead your team deep into the playoffs, that is absolutely worth a second-round pick. And Jalen Hurts is someone who's proven that he can win, and he can come in after being a backup and still win something. Like, I think he did that with Tua. He was Tua's backup originally, right?
No,
So
Tua was his backup, and then Tua went down, and Hurts played in the playoffs.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So he's shown that he can come off the bench and he can play in the playoffs and still like be there with a good team. And for the Eagles, it makes total sense because and at the end of the rookie contract, they could just let him walk and then pick someone new to back up Carson Wentz. So I totally am cool with the Hurts pick, and I like it going forward for the Eagles.
I think this was actually a pretty good selection. I don't just think it was okay. I think for a few reasons, this was a really good idea for them. Very different situation from the Packers, right? You have Carson Wentz, a younger quarterback, but he's proven he can't stay healthy. Like you said, I think he did make it through the regular season last year, but he got injured during the playoff game, and he wasn't able to come back in. So if you think Hurts is a guy who can develop quickly and end up being a backup in year one, it's worthwhile. And like you said, with Nick Foles winning the Super Bowl there, and let's say Carson Wentz goes down at some point and Hurts is able to come in and prove himself to be competent. You're not even going to end up losing the second-round pick because you're going to be able to trade him and recoup that pick at least if you want. I think it's a situation where the only way you're losing draft capital out of this is if he ends up being a bad quarterback. But for now, you're getting a backup quarterback who you'll probably end up trading before his rookie contract ends up. Or the only way you don't trade him is if you like him more than Carson Wentz. But that's obviously you would have a lot to prove before that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's the worst pick, but I know lots of Eagles fans, and it's not that they weren't happy with the pick. It's that in the first round, they didn't take the receiver that they wanted. In the second round, you don't think they're going to go quarterback. You have Carson. You think you might address linebacker, a position of need, and you go with Hurts. And it's not a bad situation for the Eagles. I think it's a worse situation for Jalen Hurts. That's what I was trying to say before.
I think it's a great situation for Jalen Hurts because I think he's definitely going to get to play at some point. Carson Wentz is not going to stay healthy. We know that at some point he's going to come down and Jalen Hurts will come in at least within the 4 years. So they're going to give him a chance to succeed on a really good offense that's well coached, and he might come in and potentially have to play in the playoffs. And if he plays well, then you said yourself, or one of you said, he's going to go get a contract like Foles did. Like someone's going to want to pay him to be their guy. And for the Eagles organization, you can't afford 2 quarterbacks. And with Wentz, sometimes it seems like you need to have 2 quarterbacks. So I think the Hurts pick all around is a really like impressive pick for the organization. And I think it'll pan out in the future for sure. It probably earlier than later too.
Once you're a second round pick in the NFL at the quarterback position, you're never really guaranteed to be the future of the franchise. You just like for him, I think you're looking for an opportunity to show your skills on the NFL level. And he's going to get that at some point with the Eagles, right? Unless things work out perfectly for them and Wentz stays healthy, then they'll be overjoyed by that. But I think he'll get a chance to play at some point and get a chance to prove that he can play at that level. And if you're Jalen Hurts, that's all you can really ask for.
Definitely all fair points. So now we're going to move on to the 6th quarterback off the board was Jacob Eason getting drafted to the Colts. And I think this is a great situation for him, sitting behind Phillip Rivers for at least 1 year. That's how long we had Rivers for. And getting to learn from him, seeing how to be a professional, which is very big in my opinion. And he was a quarterback who was good in college. He broke Gardner Minshew's record for Pac-12 passing yards a year ago. And he's a guy who went very underrated. He's definitely a step. I think he's pretty even with Jalen Hurts. Like, I don't think that one is really necessarily better than the other than the athleticism of Jalen Hurts. But I think it's a good pick for the Colts. Let him sit back there. He's an Andrew Luck type of player, Phillip Rivers kind of player. So let him sit for a year and maybe give him a chance next year.
Yeah, I think any quarterback drafted by the Colts is going to be immediately thrown into a great situation. The Colts have one of, if not the best offensive line for pass protection in the league. So already you have a great like fallback there with that. T.Y. Hilton's still really good. Their wide receiver core outside of T.Y. Hilton is a little questionable.
They drafted
Michael Pittman, yeah.
Yeah, they did draft Michael Pittman, who I think is going to be great. So Michael Pittman, they have Campbell from last year. They drafted T.Y. Hilton is fine. They lost Eric Ebron too, but Jack Doyle's still there. He could be a starting tight end.
I think Jonathan Taylor.
They signed.
Oh yeah, of course, Jonathan Taylor. The weapons there like are pretty solid, but more importantly, offensive line and the Colts defense is like moving up. Not that that's as important for a quarterback. So as a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, having that like a good veteran receiver along with 2 young up and coming receivers and a great offensive line, you couldn't really ask for a better spot to be placed.
Yeah, especially with the Colts, Phil Rivers is pretty old. He's on a 1-year contract right now. And that you're going to get – if you show well in this year playing under Rivers, you're going to get a chance to be the future of that franchise even if you're able to prove yourself. So, again, it's a position where if you're a middle-round quarterback, not a first-round type of guy, you couldn't really ask for a better spot than the Colts, who have a great coaching staff and great offensive weapons.
Honestly, even a first-round guy, I don't know where else you'd want to go. Like, the Colts are a really great situation to be drafted into. So it was kind of shocking for me that they traded their first-round pick for DeForest Buckner. But seeing as how their offseason went and their draft went, I totally get it, and I think they're going to be a threat in the AFC South.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that AFC South is – I mean, before the draft, I feel like we all thought it was kind of weak. The Texans are moving down. The Jaguars are probably going to be the worst team in the league next year. So it's really up to the Colts and Titans. And the Texans will still be in the conversation, I'm sure. But it's a good pick moving forward. Not necessarily this season, but they had a good draft all around. So I think the Colts are definitely an up-and-coming team. So
yeah, and I definitely disagree with you about the Texans. But right before we move on, even though they traded DeAndre Hopkins and made stupid moves, they're still – Deshaun Watson arguably is at least is a top 5 quarterback in my opinion. I think I have him as my number 3 quarterback. Like he's gonna he's gonna make something happen in the South.
They'll still be in the competition. I'm not doubting them. I just think the Titans are a better team overall. And I think
roster-wise, the Texans are the 3rd best team, but I agree Deshaun Watson's the X factor.
Yeah, the Colts and Titans are gonna be fighting for a playoff spot or for a wild card spot. I think the Titans kind of have a lead on the other two, but I'm sure that they'll compete. It'll be a competitive division other than the Jaguars, I think. So,
The Titans are my flop prediction, I think,
really?
going into next year. They're like a sleeper. I don't think they will, but I think they have a decent chance to flop.
Bold
Yeah,
take.
I'm sure we'll get into teams we think are going to flop at some episode soon.
Yeah. Oh, you heard it here first. Bold take. Michael Bet. Titans flopping.
Titans suck.
Watch
Michael
out. I
Levitt.
mean, the Colts got way better. Like way better.
How? How so though? Besides picking up Taylor and Pittman. Who they-
Well, they got Phillip Rivers. They got DeForest Buckner. Their offensive line has only gotten better every year. Their wide receiving core got completely renovated. Their running back is going to be way better coming into this year. They did a lot. Like the Colts are scary good, and like somehow I don't know where all that came from.
We have to keep in mind, before Andrew Luck retired, the Colts were like favorites to win that division a year ago. So really, if you believe Phil Rivers is still a player that can compete and that the Colts even slightly upgraded their roster, they're going to be a competitor this year.
It'll be a competitive division. I have no doubt about that. But I don't know if they've made a step to be that much better than the Titans and even the Texans.
I think the main thing is just Rivers over Brissett to me. I think that's a big upgrade.
Yeah.
I think they will certainly be better than the Titans. I think the Titans they had 26 free agents. They didn't re-sign everybody. Their offensive line is definitely going to be weaker without Jack Conklin being the anchor tackle that they had.
So I have a little all-fair bet going here.
I would be worried if I were the Titans, seeing the Colts come out of nowhere and take the division back after.
And I don't really think it's out of nowhere.
Only one
the
year
roster has been on the up.
From losing
it's just the Andrew Luck
Luck.
retirement gave them a step back. They weren't ready for that. But the Colts have been building the right way for quite a few years now.
The
Of course,
Colts,
Chris Ballard became their GM.
Andrew Luck is a generational quarterback, and losing him and yet still looking amazing is really impressive by the Colts.
They definitely were not amazing last year, though, and you don't know if all these guys are going to work out. So
yeah, you can't be amazing with Jacoby Brissett as your quarterback.
No, I'm not saying that you can be, but he's saying that they looked amazing. I don't think that they did last year.
For Jacoby Brissett being the starting quarterback, they looked pretty amazing. Pete.
They won, what, 5 games?
They won 7 games.
Did they?
I think they won 7.
All right. Okay. Well, it looks like we have our first press coverage podcast bet going on here. It's tough for me to go. The Titans and the Colts are 2 of my favorite teams, and the Colts have 2 of my favorite players on it, so it's kind of hard to go against.
I will happily bet that the Colts will take the division next year.
All right. It sounds like we got a deal. All right. So back to our segment. Last quarterback that we want to talk about who got drafted later is Jake Fromm getting drafted to the Buffalo Bills. Fromm was a very, very good college quarterback, and it kind of goes underrated because he had a great offensive line and he had great weapons around him. But he put up numbers. He played in big games. He played against Baker Mayfield in the playoffs 3 years ago, and just continued to build as a quarterback. And he has high praise from their coach, who is very experienced in the league. And I think that, I don't know if he'll give Josh Allen a run for his money, but Josh Allen goes down, I think he's a very viable replacement.
I don't love the pick for Buffalo. If anything, I think this is a worse pick than Jalen Hurts and all these other teams that are picking quarterbacks. You have the young quarterback of your future, Josh Allen, already on the roster. You don't need a backup guy. He's not an injury-prone guy. He's a big, bruising, runner at quarterback, Josh Allen. So the early selection of a quarterback, to me, I think is kind of stupid and redundant. But it's fine. Obviously, if you are worried about him and his accuracy going forward in the future, and maybe you don't want him to be your guy, then this is a good pick. But I think the Bills are in on Josh Allen being the guy. They made the playoffs last year. They have a good roster. So picking a quarterback here, to me, I think is kind of pointless.
I think you're wrong about the injury-prone thing. Allen did miss quite a bit of time his rookie year, and he's a running guy, right? So you're never really sure if he's going to be able to stay healthy. I agree with them taking a quarterback this early, but to me, Fromm's just not the guy, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to really match up to the NFL level. Well, I could be very wrong about this, but to me, Fromm just isn't going to be going to be able to compete at this level as a starter. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that his resume says differently, and it's a completely different level. I agree with that, but to be a backup, like I don't think he'll ever be anything special in the league. But to be a backup, like plug and play whenever Allen goes down, I think it's a fine pick. And the Bills came out and said like we couldn't pass on him. Like they did not plan on taking Jake Fromm, but they thought that he was too good to fall that low and wanted to take him. So obviously they
It's just if I were Buffalo and I really wanted a great backup quarterback, I would look on the free agent market because you got guys like Andy Dalton who's going to be overlooked. And if you don't love Josh Allen, I'd rather bring in Andy Dalton.
Andy Dalton's not a free agent though. You got to trade for him rather than picking him.
Okay, well not yet.
To me, Cam Newton, if you could somehow convince him to come in as a backup, would be perfect for the Bills. Not anymore now that you drafted this guy, but he plays similarly, not the same, but similarly to Josh Allen. So that would have been interesting, but
yeah, I
think that happen now.
Yeah.
If I'm the Bills, I would bring in Cam Newton as a starter.
They're not doing that. Pretty much guarantee that.
I like Cam.
All right, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of the Press Coverage Podcast.
Well, before we wrap up, actually, what did you guys think of the virtual draft?
I think it went pretty smoothly.
Yeah,
they did a good job with it. Teams were hesitant to trade
really
because of the technology, but I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like there weren't too many mess ups. Roger Goodell must have been on like crack or something. Like,
oh my god,
he just like looked,
did you see the way he would turn to the fans before when it was the back? He'd be like,
he was so out of it. He went to go.
"Come on, Jets fans."
He was such a statue.
He had to be on something.
Oh, yeah.
He had no emotion when he read anything. I mean, he's not much for emotion normally, but like he was just blank face. He looked like his eyes like had foam. Like he didn't have cornea. It looked like it was just white in his eyes.
By pick 70, when he started sitting down in the chair, he was completely bloodshot eyes. It was just like all the way back in his chair.
Yeah. The memes about working from home
just keep going down and nobody. Did you see his bobblehead moved too, like different positions? Like he must have moved it during picks.
All the commentators kept commenting on his chair after he made the comment about it being like his special game day chair or whatever. I thought that was really funny.
He was so out of it. He was so out of it. But I mean, he made it work. Like he was the guy who was like, all right, we're doing the draft. Like, I don't care, which is good for the league. It's good for the country, just being able to see some kind of sporting event. And I think that this is probably the best move that Roger Goodell has made as commissioner.
Yeah, and it was the most viewed draft of all time. So obviously,
so he's definitely doing something right this draft.
So for as much of positives we had with the situation we were given in this draft, Roger Goodell, I just can't get over it. When he had everyone on the cameras behind him, like booing him, and he's like, "Come on, boo louder, guys." He's such a beta. Like it made me upset when he was like encouraging these people to boo him. Like as much as I like Commissioner Goodell as a commissioner, sometimes he's such a beta.
Especially whenever the Chiefs pick, he'd be like, "Come on, Super Bowl champs, you're the champs." That's what he was kept saying to them. It was as if he like a few words programmed in his head for each team, and then he would just like say them whatever the team was saying.
That man is a beta male robot, and he
went to go give Cesar Ruiz a hug. He was like this, like, dude, you don't have to do that. Like, we know it's virtual. We know the circumstances. Like. But it's okay. I think he did a good job. Besides looking lifeless, and I don't know, it happens. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of the Press Coverage Podcast. So Tuesday episodes on Thursday. We're gonna break down the entire first round. Give the first round teams our grades, I guess we'll do, and go over what we thought was a good pick for the players, what we thought was a good pick for the teams, and how they're going to work out next season. So, yeah. Anything else to say?
No, that's it.
I think that about covers it.
All right. So, come back Thursday for our next episode, and we'll see you then.